Hey friends, going live. Talk about what's happening in the world right now. I've been asked recently about uh, what the military can do to oppose fascism, and there's actually ways that the military can oppose fascism that civilians can't. Right? Like civilians, like all we can do is protest, and that's important. Um, we can appeal, and we can uh, we can petition our elected leaders, and we can petition our elected leaders, and we can call them, and we can pressure them, and we can do all of those things, but we can't actually force our elected representatives to do anything. We can't. That's just not how our Constitution is set up. That we have that ability. Like we elect them, and then they're supposed to go do the work, right? So we can't have like a big vote and force anybody to um, impeach or take some action like that we might want them to take. We can pressure them, but we can't force it to happen. But the military can do other things. The military um, can oppose fascism in ways that we can't through protest. So, and I've been asked about this recently because I was in the military and I have a unique perspective, I guess, on how it works. That um, the oath that we take in the military, and this part's the same, whether it's the oath of enlistment or the oath of office, we say the same thing. We say that we will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Uh, and like that's the obligation. Further on in the oath of enlistment, what it also says is that the oath says to obey the orders of the president, of the officers appointed over them, and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So, what does the Uniform Code of Military Justice have to do with that? Well, the UCMJ requires that members of the military disobey unlawful orders. So, it's not an option. You have to disobey unlawful orders. That's the thing that I guess a lot of people don't understand or get wrong. And the reason our UCMJ is written that way is that we understand the fallacy of the Nuremberg defense, right? As a nation, the Nuremberg defense, for those that maybe aren't familiar, is the defense that a bunch of Nazis tried to use at the Nuremberg trials following World War II. They tried to say that they were just following orders, and just following orders is not an acceptable excuse. That was debated long and hard by the tribunal at the Nuremberg trials. They assessed, like, would making the Nuremberg defense unacceptable cause a breakdown of military structure? They wanted to understand that, so they debated it. It wasn't just an easy decision for them. So they ultimately decided, though, that the military does not break down if military members are allowed to disobey unlawful orders. So they determined that the Nuremberg defense was false, couldn't be used. You can't just say you're following orders and get away with whatever you did as a member of the military. And our UCMJ acknowledges that to a point that it obligates members of our military to disobey a unlawful order. So of course we have to get into the conversation pretty quickly of like what constitutes an unlawful order, what would make something unlawful, that it would be obvious for the member of the military to go ahead and disobey that order or to refuse to follow through with it. So things like sending in the military to into American cities, which we've obviously seen happen recently, that's um, that's not exactly illegal. But ordering members of the military to then fire on American citizens, that would be contrary to Pacta Comitatus. That would be an unlawful order. That would be something that any member of the military would have to reject. And again, it's not optional. The UCMJ is very clear on this. You have to obey lawful orders, and you have to disobey unlawful orders. So that's like That's the struggle, or the, the key here is understanding what makes an order unlawful. Um, so something like what's happening or just happened, in the last few hours, it seems like, um, in order to bomb a foreign country, surely it's not illegal, um, as much as it might feel immoral or unwise, get us into war. It's not an illegal order. So I don't think those members of the military were sort of in any way obligated to disobey that order. However, bombing at some point is an act of war, and the president does not have the power to declare war. So if the dropping of those bombs constitutes an act of war, then the president doesn't actually have the authority to do it, and that makes it an unlawful order. So it makes it a strange scenario that we find ourselves in, I think, because these members of the military, as I say, they're obligated to disobey an unlawful order. But how are they going to know when an order is unlawful? So, does it truly constitute an act of war? And it's not unlawful that the act of war be made if Congress has approved it. So the members of the military being given this order, they sort of have to have the wherewithal to ask, is this going to constitute an act of war? Has Congress approved it? And those questions I don't believe would be asked, because you also have this mentality within the military of just do as you're told, right? That's how we're all conditioned when we're in the military. And there is a certain degree of decorum, you might say, or military structure that has to be observed, and orders have to be followed. There's no question about it. If it's a lawful order, it has to be followed. So we don't have the habit of questioning every single order as to whether or not it's lawful or unlawful. There's sort of an assumption at some point that every order we're being given is going to be a lawful one, and therefore we just got to follow it. And if it's a lawful order, we're obligated to follow it. So we just get into the habit of always do as we're told, always follow the orders that we're given, and we don't have this habit of questioning the orders. And normally, I guess, prior to 6 months ago, I suppose, we never really would have questioned that as a matter of course and being normal. But we find ourselves in a strange world now, with fascism in the White House and the GOP in full support of fascistic tendencies. We have to remind our military, remind all the members of the military, from the grunts up to the senior generals, that they have an obligation to question every single order they're given as to whether or not it's a lawful one. And if it's unlawful, or even the possibility that it's unlawful, they're obligated to question it, obligated to stand against it if it's unlawful. So I think that's what we need to see, but I don't have the answers for you as to how we go about re-educating members of our military that that's what they need to do. So it's a struggle, but that's what the military has in front of it. Is it has this obligation. So first of all, going back to the oath of office, the oath of enlistment, either one makes this oath to the Constitution, and that's something that I took to heart. When I took that oath, I was kind of floored by it. I knew what the oath was ahead of time. You kind of read it and stuff, but I guess until you take the oath and you pledge yourself to the Constitution, you don't fully process what that means. And it's a document, right? You're taking an oath to a document, not to a person or an office or a process or something like that. You're taking an oath to this document. It's not even an oath to the people or Congress. It's an oath to the document that structures our country. So I took it to heart, like I said, and thought, well, I better understand that document better. So I went to the exchange, on base, and I looked around and I found a little pocket version of the Constitution. I wore it in the the breast pocket of my uniform every day I served. Um, Definitely not a standard process, not something that everybody did, or very, very few people ever did, I guess. But I did it. I kept it with me all times, and would thumb through it, read through it. But this oath to the Constitution, I think, is indicative of how important the rule of law is in the United States. That our members of the military take an oath to the Constitution, to the rule of law, and the Constitution being the supreme law of the land. That's how it's designed, right? And that's what the Supreme Court says. That's what the Constitution itself says. The Constitution is the supreme law, and the law comes above all, right? The law comes before presidents, before governors, before military, before anyone else, and or before any power, any other power. Like the law is the supreme power. So we take an oath to the supreme law of the land. And that's why it's so important to understand that our oath obligates us to stand against unlawful orders. Not like I said, it's not a choice; it's a requirement. Like the requirement to follow lawful orders, we have a requirement to also disobey unlawful orders. And taking an oath to the Constitution, I think, is just that clear and direct reminder that no person is above the law. We don't take an oath to the person or to the office of commander-in-chief or the generals or admirals in charge of whatever branch or whatever. We take an oath to the law itself, to the supreme law. And therefore it is an obligation upon every member of the military to have some understanding of what lawful and unlawful is going to mean. And that's why I carried this in my pocket. That's why I read it. But I think that there's this obligation upon us all now to remind members of the military that they have this obligation and to help them kind of learn to understand what a lawful and unlawful order looks like. I don't know that it was ever that important in the past to train people as to how to recognize an unlawful order, but it's absolutely necessary right now. No question about that we have this serious obligation to train our military into how to recognize an unlawful order. Because if they're given one, I keep saying, they're obligated to disobey it. It's not a choice. They can't obey an unlawful order and then later say, I was just following orders. That's the Nuremberg defense. That's been debunked by the Nuremberg trials and by our UCMJ. It acknowledges that defense is never acceptable. That defense does not work. You are guilty of the unlawful act if you perpetrate it. So if you're given an unlawful order, you're obligated to disobey it. That's the key here. That's the thing we have to find a way to get our members of the members of our military to understand. And like I said, I don't think it's ever been necessary in the past to like train the military on how to recognize unlawful orders. But we have to do it now. We have to find some way to do it now because they're going to be given unlawful ones. They already potentially were, right? What was done tonight could be construed as an act of war, could be defined as an act of war, and the president doesn't have that power. The Constitution is very clear. The power to wage war, the power to declare war, rests solely with the Congress. So if the president takes an action that is considered an act of war, he doesn't have that power. It's directly in our Constitution. So of course they're going to make the argument that it's not an act of war. Okay, I mean, we can have that conversation, I suppose, but get the partisanship out of politics for a minute. If the president did something that Congress does consider an act of war, and he didn't have approval to do that, then Congress is entirely within their rights to impeach, get rid of him, as they should, because he's not operating within the law, within the Constitution, as he is oathed to do so. I mean, the president takes the oath too. It's a different oath, but it's in the Constitution there, but takes that same oath to support and defend the Constitution, support and uphold. And if he's violated that oath, like Congress absolutely can and should get rid of him. But like I said, Says you're confused. Yeah, liberal, leftist. Um, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't be a true American and not be liberal or progressive. To be clear, I don't believe in the parties. Parties are an un-American institution. So no, I've never joined a party in my life, never will. But yeah, progressive, liberal, leftist. I mean, you can't be an American and a patriot and be a conservative these days. Absolutely not. Not a possibility. So I hope that unconfuses you. The president, he takes this oath. He's supposed to support and defend, uphold the Constitution, um, and then he violates court orders from the Supreme Court. Right there, should have been removed from office. And again, you have to take the partisanship out of the politics of it right now. Like, the Congress is the supreme power, the supreme legislative power of the United States by design. The president is supposed to be a servant of Congress. That's what George Washington said. That's what it says in the Constitution, more or less. It doesn't use that word, but it's in the Constitution and very clear. Article 1 is the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive branch. So subservient by design there. But by design in terms of the very structure of it, that the president has absolutely no power to create law. Just go do it. It's actually supposed to be termed the executive branch. President is the military leader. Sure. What's your point? The executive branch we should call it the executive branch because their goal and their purpose is solely to execute the laws that Congress makes. So Congress is this supreme power. And if Congress recognized their true power and that they are not subservient to the president, it's supposed to be the exact other way. That the president works for Congress. And then the president disobeys the Constitution. The president doesn't want to spend the money the way Congress has said to spend the money. Then they need to get rid of him. That's Congress's job. The president has one duty, and that's to serve Congress. And when he doesn't do it, Congress gets rid of him. That's why Congress has the sole power of impeachment and conviction. For separation of powers, they separated it between the two. The House can impeach, the Senate has to convict, just to make sure that it's all separated and on the up and up when it happens. But the point is that they have that power because the president works for them. So they have the power to fire him. That's the idea there. So if the president doesn't want to work for them the way he's designed to work for them, the way he's supposed to work for them, Congress is supposed to get rid of him. That's the design of the Constitution. And all of this goes back to the oath that we take. The president took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Every member of the military takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution. So we have this obligation to make sure that the Constitution is being observed. And the Constitution requires that the president works for Congress. So if the president doesn't do his job, we should get rid of him. That's the whole point. I don't understand what you're saying. Never happened. What never happened? Guess we'll go on into the go back into the idea of moving the goalposts. Can't stand MAGA. Mm-hmm. Well, of course you can't stand them. I mean, they're un-American. They're treasonous traitors to the Constitution, and they all know it. They all know what they're doing. That's why they're so combative about it, because they have to make the fight over the fundamentals. First of all, they lack the intelligence to, compete in anything complex. So of course they make it all over the fundamentals, right? Like, they tried to usurp the flag. They tried to usurp the idea of patriotism. They tried to steal the meaning of those concepts and those symbols so that they could, claim that what they were doing was patriotic. And sadly, the liberals and the Democrats kind of let them, right? The minute universities, what was this, back in 2007, 2008, the minute universities started contemplating the idea of not flying the American flag, at their university, they gave up. They let the conservatives at that time, the Tea Party and so forth, they let them have it. Like, by refusing to fly the flag because you were letting the flag mean what the conservatives wanted it to mean, we gave up. Like, that's the point. Uh, and at this point now they've usurped it so totally and so completely that MAGA can behave in completely un-American ways as they do, and then claim that it's patriotic because they've managed to get those symbols and those terms associated with them and their party and their movement, so that they get to claim that it's patriotic when it in no way is. It has absolutely no relation to the fundamental and foundational philosophies that our nation was built on. And not to say that our nation has ever been perfect at living up to those foundational, fundamental belief systems and philosophies that we put forward, but the fact that MAGA exists contrary to those philosophies, those belief systems, and then they claim that being that way is patriotic. It's a complete farce. It's a grift, You think bad optics for a protest on the 4th of July. Interesting. Bad optics. What are you saying there? Black Lilith? Yeah. All right, Lilith. Elaborate what you mean. Bad optics for protesting on the 4th of July. What day is better for a protest than the 4th of July? I mean, it's a celebration of the original protests. The original protest that created the United States. I mean, I don't think the 4th of July should be all that big a holiday, to be honest. It was just the sort of declaration of independence. I mean, obviously, I just mean that it was the promise of freedom that ultimately required this huge war, very costly, very bloody war of the revolution to be fought. And at the end of it, it delivered freedom to who? Landowning white men. So the 4th of July is it's not all that great. I mean, in truth, we just had the best holiday. The biggest holiday in the United States today should be Juneteenth, because it's the celebration of the delivery of freedom to far more than the 4th of July promised freedom to. So the 4th of July, it's like celebrating your birthday. What did you do on your birthday? What are you celebrating? You were the burden that day. Your mom did all the work, So celebrating your birthday, kind of egotistical, I guess, to make your birthday such a big deal. I mean, it's important to celebrate yourself and to be the center of attention once in a while. That is a valuable thing. But you didn't do anything on your birthday. The 4th of July doesn't celebrate the accomplishment of anything. We just promised freedom. MAGA will have a field day. You're saying MAGA have a field day with with there being protests on the 4th of July? Sure. Yeah. I mean, MAGA just makes a big deal about the protests no matter what day they're on, right? But the the issue, I guess, being that the 4th of July has no place in being this great big national holiday. Like I said, I think Juneteenth far better represents the true fundamental, foundational philosophies of America. And even though we didn't live up to these things, like the concept of freedom, for one, we didn't live up to it when we formed our nation, and we allowed the great sin of the 3/5 compromise to be worked into the Constitution, and we allowed indentured servitude and other things, beyond just slavery to continue. We still have this foundational philosophy built into the founding of our country that was freedom. And Juneteenth represents the actual delivery of freedom to a great many people who were the backbone and helped build this country. And let's not forget, the white people that were involved in the accomplishment of Juneteenth too. I've heard people saying about Juneteenth last week that it's not white people's holiday, so they shouldn't celebrate it. Why should they get the day off? Like, well, they should get the fucking day off too. Like, white people were primarily the white Americans that fought on the side of the Union were fighting for other people's freedom. When we fought the Revolutionary War, we fought for our own freedom, right? The people who fought in the revolution on the side of America were fighting for their own freedom. Don't get me started on how the French really won that war for us, but our history doesn't want to focus on that. So just keep an eye on the idea that people who fought in the Revolutionary War, they were fighting for their own freedom. And the people who fought in the Civil War were fighting for other people's freedom. Or in the case of the treasonous traders of the South, they were fighting to keep other people enslaved. So clearly they needed to lose, and they did. But the idea that these primarily white northern state Americans fought for the freedom of other people, and Juneteenth is the representation of that accomplishment, then it's absolutely everyone's holiday, right? It's absolutely a fundamental American holiday. Like, I don't care that it's only been an official holiday since 2021. And of course, that's going to make it a political, battleground right now, because anything done by Joe Biden is, of course, opposed, no matter what it was, no matter how valuable it was or important it was. It's going to be opposed by MAGA. So, and their dear leader, of course, in the White House, the Velveeta Voldemort himself, I think, is opposed to it. He didn't say anything to that nature, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Tangerine Tyrant cancels Juneteenth as a federal holiday one of these days. So, it didn't happen this year, but I wouldn't be surprised, just because he's making it a political thing about Joe Biden. It's not about whether America actually has something to celebrate that day. And I think Juneteenth absolutely is something to celebrate for all of America, far more than the 4th of July is. So coming back to the earlier comment about protest on the 4th of July is bad optics. Jeez, I think this is the best fucking optics you can have. Like, protest on the day that we celebrate our original protest against the crown. Because that's all it was on the 4th of July, 1776, signing the Declaration of Independence. It was just a bunch of 20-somethings getting their rocks off at giving the finger to the crown, right? Like, that's all it represented at the time. It was just a protest. They were angry. They were frustrated. So they gave their finger to the crown by signing this document and then sending it to him. But they didn't actually expect him to let us have our freedom either. So their protest, they also knew, was in a sense pointless. It was going to have to be backed up. It was going to have to be defended. And I would return to the concept that Juneteenth is a celebration of actually achieving the freedom that the 4th of July promised. It means Juneteenth should be by far the bigger holiday. But I also think that it means that if you're going to protest on a particular day of the year, I don't think you could pick a better year or better day than the 4th of July. Well, I'm glad to hear you're still going to go. I appreciate that. We need the numbers. Everyone matters. Everyone's important for this protest, for this stand against fascism and evil. And I've heard some of my videos posted recently. Like, I had somebody comment on one of my videos about not necessarily wanting to vote, feeling like, especially with the Electoral College. I think that was the topic of the video. I was talking about the Electoral College, and this person was like, why should I even bother to vote, at least in the presidency? Because the Electoral College makes it meaningless. And I just disagree with that 100%. Your vote still matters, even with the Electoral College. And if one voice matters, then of course your presence at a protest matters. So I'm glad you're still going to go. I don't think you're the minority. I mean, there's something like, we're alone in this. It's just 1 and 1. Like, there's no minority when it's 2 people. So I'm just the one with the microphone right now, I guess. Been at every protest, fighting as much as you can. Great. It is stressful. Oh my God, it's stressful. You can't fight fascism and have it be easy, though. It's not a fight. I don't know what that means. Is that what makes it rewarding or something? I don't know. But yeah, it's stressful, 100%. Every day is a new lesson. Mm. Every day is a new lesson. I think that's like an optimistic way of looking at the overwhelm. I mean, that's certainly what's been happening for the last 150 days or whatever it's been officially since inauguration, is that they've just kind of pushed the overwhelm. Um, they want us to be completely overwhelmed by all the many, many things that are happening, and that way the little things are slipping through, and like we're just not angry enough about any one thing because we're pretty angry about everything. Um, so every day's a new lesson. Yeah, it's a certain way to look for it. It's a cope. It's a cope. Yeah, it's a way to cope with it by telling yourself it's a lesson. All right, I see. I'd agree with that. New person commenting. What's your take on what? User big number. What's your take on what? It's like having to prioritize which issue is most pressing each day, but keeping them all in your mind. Well, you can't keep them all in your mind. That's why we can't do this alone. That's why it matters that everybody show up to every single protest, which you say you're doing. Like, obviously, like, you're doing the right things. And you're having the feelings about them. And you're having feelings about what day we do the protest. And that's valid, absolutely. Um, I just have an opposing opinion on doing a protest on the 4th of July, but I agree with you about picking which one is the priority each day, but I don't try to keep them all in your mind. Um, Definitely can't keep each and every single one. That's why we're a team. That's why we're a group, and we help each other out. Like, but we need to get organized, right? Like certain groups need to be focused on each and every issue so that we're approaching them all. I don't know. All right. So what's my take on the Iran situation? Now I see your comment. So we were talking about that at the beginning. Um, the Iran situation. All right, so they bombed Iran. Well, for one, I return to the original topic: is that the military has in the United States, our military has an obligation to oppose unlawful orders. So immediately you have to start asking what constitutes an unlawful order, and that's a valid question. What does constitute an unlawful order? Well, part of the obviousness of that is that our oath as a member of the military in the United States is to the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land by design. And our oath is to the law. So the law supersedes all, and our oath is to the supreme document or the supreme law of the land, to the document that defines it. And that's what should start to inform you as to what is an unlawful order. So, bombing Iran, is that an unlawful order? Not necessarily, um, but it can be, because the type of bomb that we use, the extent of the bombing, can very easily be construed as an act of war. And the President of the United States does not actually have the authority. Imagine that, right? He's the commander in chief of the military, absolutely. But he does not actually have the authority to instigate or take an act of war without the approval of Congress. So in the past, which you will have seen if you look at the history, you see that certain presidents, when they've done significant action like this in foreign countries, they will seek the approval of Congress. Um, might be done behind closed doors, might be done in conversation with just the House Armed Services Committee or something of that nature, but they have a conversation with Congress, and that does not appear to have been done this time. So the president taking action that could be construed as an act of war, and our members of the military didn't disobey it, um, probably because they didn't think to ask if he had Congress's approval. Why would they? They're following the orders of their commander in chief, or they're following the orders of their commanding officer, who's following the orders of their commanding officer, who's following the orders of the president, or some point through the chain of command that way. So at some point, nobody really thought to ask the question: is this a lawful order? Because it seems fairly reasonable, and as I know how that sounds, by the way, like reasonable to drop 30,000-pound bombs on a foreign country, like, no, that's not reasonable, not to a moral person. But from a military perspective, like being asked to drop a bomb is not necessarily going to trigger any thoughts as to whether or not this is an unlawful order. But it very well might have been, because it could be construed an act of war, and the president doesn't have that authority. So that's my take on it. The way you ask, what's my take on the Iran situation? I don't know. I mean, it could have been a big mistake. Never served. But imagine this has to be hard for the soldiers. Yeah, soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen. I can't speak for all of them. Of course, I was in the Navy. I can speak for myself. Um, yeah, you're right. It's hard. I was never ordered when I was in to fire off weapons in this sense. I was served on a submarine. We had Tomahawk missiles. We had the ADCAP 42 torpedo, incredibly destructive weapon. Um, Never had to fire it. Part of the hardship of being in the military for any soldier like this is, I'll tell you what's hard about it is, I trained to do a job I never actually wanted to do. If my submarine got the phone call to launch Tomahawks into a foreign country, I would want to be prepared to do that. I would want to be the best submarine in the fleet and be able to do that mission to the best of our ability. But secretly, as a moral and compassionate and empathetic individual, I would never actually want to get that order. So I trained to do a job I never actually wanted to do. That's the hard thing for a soldier like this. Or I'm picturing probably the pilots of these B-2 bombers that flew these massive weapons into Iran and dropped them. They trained to do that job. And if they get the call to do it, they're going to do it to the best of their ability, and by all accounts, they probably have. Uh, but they probably, just like me, as a moral individual, hoped that call would never come, and it did. And now they've had to do that job, and they have to live with the fact that they dropped these massive pieces of ordnance on, people. People died. You know, that's not uh, that's not in question right now. People died by those bombs that were dropped. So, and those pilots who dropped those bombs, they have to live with that. So yeah, it's hard for them. You see, balancing following orders but wondering if it's constitutional. Well, that's what I was talking about earlier, I guess. Is it constitutional for the president to order the bombing of a foreign country? Not necessarily. If it's construed as an act of war, and if Congress defines it as an act of war, then the Congress could hold him as guilty of violating the Constitution. What does that look like? I mean, the only thing that looks like is impeachment and conviction. Um, that's all the Constitution has available to deal with this situation in that way. Is that the the, the Congress could, and this is certainly possible constitutionally speaking, they could come together and say, we think the dropping of these bombs constitutes an act of war that the president did not have our permission to do. And the Constitution is very clear that the authority to declare war rests solely with Congress. So if they say the president went outside of his constitutional authority, and we're going to impeach him for that, and then the Senate says we agree, we're going to convict him for that, and we're going to remove him from office because he violated the Constitution. Um, that's possible. I see your next comment, cynical about they'll never impeach him. 100% agree. I think you're absolutely right. I think partisanship is far too present in our Congress and in our politics in our country in general right now for anything of the nature of that sort to come into play. Because if you remove the partisanship from the conversation, Congress has the power, right? Congress is the supreme legislative power of the United States, and everything else is derived from legislative power. So the primary power of United States government rests in Congress, not in the presidency. Uh, for something like 80 years, we've kind of had a different approach as a nation. That the president is, assumed far greater power than he was ever actually given by the Constitution, but we've kind of allowed it as a nation. Congress has sort of, back alley approved it by certain acts of Congress and certain uh, uh, offices and departments that they've allowed to be created. They've allowed it. But the reality is that the president is not supposed to be this extremely powerful individual. He's supposed to be a servant of Congress, like I was saying before. That you know, and if you removed that partisanship from our government, and Congress looked at it and said, look, we are supposed to be the supreme power in the United States, and this particular president is stepping way beyond that power, then we should do something about that. We should demonstrate that we are the supreme power, and we should impeach and we should convict. Again, you have to remove all this partisanship, from it, because it's only about what the Constitution says, and the perspective that I'm providing is that the Congress has all the power. They have the power to fire him. So they need to use it if they want to take their power back. If Congress had the ability to look at the situation and say, oh, our power has been whittled away for 80 years, and that's not okay. What's the thing that we can do to take our power back? And ultimately, by Congress taking the power back, they're restoring that power to the people. Because the president is not elected by the people. He's elected by the Electoral College. And the Electoral College has been corrupted by the parties. So it's really the parties that have all this power in the presidency. And that's why we see it happen the way it's happened all of our lives, right? Like, nobody here is old enough to remember a time when it wasn't like that. And I don't know, maybe there wasn't a time when it wasn't like that. The only president ever who was an independent was George Washington. So yeah, maybe there's never been a time where the parties weren't in control of the presidency. But my point is that the Congress has the power by the Constitution. So if Congress takes the action to restore their power, that means they're also restoring the power to the people, because the people directly elect our representatives, and since 1917 we directly elect our senators. So Congress needs to take its power back. That's what I'm saying. So if you take the partisanship out of it and they look at the situation and they decide, what can we do to take our power back? Impeach and convict. Absolutely, 100%. They have the power to fire the president. And the people should be totally okay with that, right? Because the people elected those representatives and those senators, and the people did not directly elect the president. So they should be more than okay with a Congress saying, this president does not function within American requirements, so we're getting rid of him. Back to your comment, though, no, they're not going to do it. Because partisanship does play a part. Partisanship does come into play. And partisanship is the downfall of this country. George Washington predicted that. That's something a lot of people don't know. George Washington, in his farewell address to the nation, when he stepped down after his 2 terms as president, he listed off in his farewell address, which is a bit lengthy, but worth the read. If you consider yourself a patriot, a true American, find his farewell address and read the whole thing, because he lists off in it certain requirements, or charges, I guess you might say, charges that Americans forever, in perpetuity, should all be required to do or not do. And one of the things that he talked about was the parties. He said, I'm going to quote him here. He said, quote, "The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads, at length, to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual. And sooner or later, the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty." End quote. So George Washington predicted exactly the downfall of this country due to the parties that we are seeing since the 2024 election. I mean, he might as well have been describing that election. Um, and he knew that the parties would be the problem. And it is. It is what we see as the problem today. It's exactly why the impeachment idea is never going to move forward. Not with this particular Congress, not with this particular presidency. Um, because for them, the partisanship is what matters. For their party, the domination of power is what matters. It's been the bedrock principle of party politics since the beginning, which is exactly what Washington was warning us against. That the parties don't care about the people. They become an institution in and of themselves and desire power for themselves. And that's it. That's all the parties care about. So that's what they do. So yeah, will they impeach? No way, no how. Not in my mind. I mean, if they're not willing to impeach him at this point, he's already done enough. Violated court orders by the Supreme Court. Now tonight, potentially an act of war without permission from Congress, clearly outside his authority as the commander in chief. So if they're not going to impeach him over something like that, they won't impeach him over anything. I mean, tonight is maybe a turning point. I don't know. Maybe Congress will start to feel a little bit differently if they see that he's willing to do something like this without approval. And I admit, maybe we don't know. Maybe he did get Congress's approval for this. I doubt it. Really doesn't seem that way from everything that we do know at this point. But maybe he did. But if he didn't, maybe Congress looks at this and says, "This is a bridge too far, taking us to the brink of war, or potentially to war." I mean, if we're at war right now tonight, folks, like in the future, tonight will be regarded as the start of the war. So, there's a comment here. If Biden had done even a fraction of any of this, they would have roasted him. Yeah, they would have, including Democrats. The Democrats are historically they're a coalition of like-minded individuals. They're not an institution quite the way the GOP is. It's sort of been their downfall. Sort of been the problem that the Democratic Party has is they're not the political machine that the GOP is. But yeah, I agree. If Biden had done half of this, there would have been Democrats standing against him even. Hey, Slary. I didn't see you were here. Thanks for joining me. Just getting used to being on live. Haven't done it much. I did it once at the No Kings protest, but this is my first conversational live. So yeah, you say this is war. I can't say you're wrong. Yeah, wild night for the first live, definitely. Somebody lurking in there. That's a very important individual. Just joined the live. So wild night for my first live. You're right, Slary. But what better night to start than now, I guess. I would go back to your comment, though. This is war. Okay. Are we at war? What's the other comment here? Basically saying it's not war, there's peace now. What do you mean there? Is that what the president said? Bomb them and then said now it's on them to yeah, that's kind of what he said, isn't it? We've bombed them and now their job is to come to us and sue for peace. Yeah. Your comments clarify. I'll scroll. Sorry. The way Trump phrased his tweet says to me, I love that you still call it a tweet. I will never not refer to it as Twitter because I just hope that it pisses people off, like the right people. It's still Twitter. Says Says to me he's trying to skirt the Congress approval. Yeah, okay. So are we at war? Yeah. Um, Slary, I don't have an answer. I don't know. War is a definition of interpretation, I think. This is, I mean, politically. Uh, I want to be clear on that personally. I regard what we're doing absolutely as an act of war. Does Congress see it that way? Maybe, maybe not. Uh, Constitutionally, we can't be at war. Congress is the only body with the power to declare war. So until they declare it, we're not at war. That's a constitutional definition. Uh, Skirting Congress since day one. That's the truth. Yeah, I believe we are at war. History will tell, right? I mean, what if I don't I don't want him to get the satisfaction. I don't want uh, the orange oligarch to get the satisfaction of being right. But let's say, for the sake of discussion here, that he is, and Iran's response to this is like, "Shoo, we bit off more than we can chew. All right, let's make peace." Then were we ever really at war? I don't know. It's not going to happen, though. I mean, the hubris of presidents is so obvious, right? To think that we can just bomb a nation with a few big bombs and that their response is going to be like, "Oh, Mr. Orange Man, please let us have peace." I mean, they're going to defend themselves, as they should, right? Like, they're a sovereign nation. I don't much agree with their country. Peace through strength. Yeah, I saw that was BB's quote or something, right? Congress won't declare war because they know the people don't want war. Yeah, so they're playing political games with it. You get what I was saying. That's exactly what I was hinting at, or saying without saying. It's like, yeah, Congress doesn't declare war. Like, they never declared war in Vietnam. Was Vietnam a war? Absolutely, it was a war. I work with veterans, and I've dealt with some Vietnam era veterans, and like the shit those guys went through was fucking war. Um, but it wasn't a war because Congress never declared war against North Vietnam. Same with Korea. Same with Desert Storm. Same with Afghanistan and Iraq. We called it the War on Terror, for crying out loud. We called it the War on Terror, and it was never a declared war. Not a fan of the Iranian government, but it's not really about that. Yeah, I agree. Like, peace is more important, maybe, than governmental disagreements. Yeah. I don't much agree with the Iranian government or their policies, but the idea that we've attacked a sovereign nation on their soil, and to believe with such hubris that their response to that is going to be to bend the knee before the might of the United States. Of course not. Like, what a fucking joke. Anybody who believes that, the fact that this man believes this, that the Bone Spur Bandit believes that he's going to be seen as this great power, and this nation is going to grovel at his feet because of a few big bombs being dropped on a few strategic targets. Like, he has no idea how human beings behave, which has been very clear in his business dealings. He has no idea how humans function. Uh, these people are going to defend themselves. Like, he may have galvanized support within Iran for their military and for military action that was not there before tonight. That might be what he did. Oh, Slurry. Larry wonders if humanity will ever be enlightened enough to realize war is unnecessary. Black Lilith, I couldn't read that from I'm sitting too far away. I thought you were asking who are trans allies. And I was like, well, we could talk about that. That's fine. That's a little off topic, but sure. I am trans allies, for one. Sorry, I leaned in. You said, who are Iran's allies? Well, they have some tenuous alliances with China, with Russia. Uh, but it's complicated, as geopolitics always is. So it's not a simple like line you can draw. It's not like in the Cold War, when you had these clear lines that you could draw. The first world was America and its allies, and the second world was Russia and its allies, and the third world was everybody else who wasn't aligned. So, um, yeah, it's not as clear cut. So, who are Iran's allies? Well, I guess we'll find out. Maybe that's the way to answer that question. What did you say earlier? They said that their media, they would bomb U.S. military bases. Will they? Don't know, but they might. Uh, Putin chose Iran over Jesus. Yeah, it's a fascinating, and I have to use that word because I think it's still too fresh to choose emotionally charged words. So intellectually, I would argue that it's a fascinating um, exercise in geopolitics right now. Uh, for us to understand, like, who are the allies that will side with Iran? Who are the allies that will um, shun Iran? The sort of quasi allies, the sort of tentative allies. Who are the ones that are going to back away to see what happens? And who are the ones that are going to abandon them entirely and side with the U.S.? Like, I don't think that's easy to answer. It would not have been easy to answer yesterday, and it's harder to answer tonight because of the way this was done. So, yeah, not an easy thing to guess at or surmise. Like, what's Putin going to do? What's Iran going to do? What's anybody who might have yesterday been considered an ally of Iran? What are they going to do? I'm certainly not versed enough in modern geopolitics. I'm a constitutional scholar. I'm a history nerd. Um, but I certainly don't have the knowledge in Middle East politics, for one, and geopolitics in general to give you a clear answer. I don't know. Well, it's a tough night for all of us. Are we at war? Yeah, I think so. Is the United States at war right now? Yeah, certainly as the events of the next few days unfold. Um, Somebody said in the comments earlier about bombing, that Iran has threatened they would bomb U.S. bases. Well, I wouldn't. I believe Iran is going to retaliate. I don't believe that they're going to just immediately turn and say, "Yep, we're outmatched, outnumbered, and outgunned. Um, we give up." I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think any sovereign nation that has been attacked in this way would do that, and I don't expect that. What that means is that our countrymen are going to die. A31 joins and says this feels like a simulation. For sure, it's unreal. Yes, because what I just said, our countrymen, members of our military, soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, guardians, are potentially in harm's way right now. because of the actions of the president. And when we start getting those news reports that our countrymen have been killed by Iranian retaliatory responses, and we start to get angry that our countrymen, our nephews and nieces, and brothers and sisters, and that they're dying. Are we going to find ourselves in a little bit more supportive place of this particular president because we're now mad at Iran for killing our soldiers, our sailors? No join? What do you mean no join? Make it join military wife here? Hello? Lisa Ann? Not sure what you're talking about join. Yeah, what I was saying. I just I think that this night will be regarded as the start of a war, for sure. It's terrible. What do you mean about join the live, Lisa? Did I do something wrong with my setup? I mean, she is talking. I don't know. Maybe she means like talk to me. That's what she's trying to do. Hold on a second. What? I'll need you to pick her up. Okay. Well, I'll try to set up my live different next time. I appreciate everybody. Be sure to follow the page and smash all the buttons and check out the TikTok shop. Get your gear. Foxtrot Delta Tango. Got other good stuff in there too. Take care, everybody. I know it's a tough night.